iOS 17 is only 2 months away, and it's already looking like one of the most unique updates yet. We'll go over the things that are almost certain, the things that we may see, and the things that we all want to see, which includes dozens of suggestions that you guys had and commented in our YouTube shorts. When it comes to the things that are almost certain, the first is iOS 17 set to bring a number of nice features that users have long been requesting, even if these improvements won't be as major as the redesigned lock screen, for example, was in iOS 16. And we'll go over what sort of user-requested features we may see in just a bit. Then iOS 17 is also said to be bringing support for side loading and third-party app stores due to a new EU legislation. If you're a bit worried about the future security of your iPhone, honestly, you shouldn't be, as it will likely work in a similar way to how the Mac already does it, where they're using Gatekeeper whilst working with developers to sign specific apps and make sure that they are indeed safe for your Mac. And if you do really want to install an app that hasn't been signed, well, you can already do that if you know that it's coming from a trusted developer. Not only will this bring back games such as Fortnite, but it would also allow apps such as Xbox Game Pass to run without the current limitations of running from the browser. Customers could get lower pricing in certain apps, as developers wouldn't have to pay Apple's taxes anymore. The third thing that's almost certain too is changes to how some of Apple's first-party apps work. More specifically, this new EU legislation requires companies to open up their services and platforms, meaning that it won't just be the App Store that Apple would have to open up, but their apps as well. iMessage could finally work on Android too, same for FaceTime, and Siri could finally become smarter this way by getting access to more third-party data sources. At number 4, we have Apple Pay Later. In March of 2023, Apple has started inviting randomly selected users to start testing it, with a full launch expected around WWDC time. 5. Apple Card Savings Account. This was announced back in October, but it hasn't been released yet. It's a feature that allows you to open up a savings account within the Apple Card with a couple of perks, including daily cash rewards. This is likely to be launched as part of iOS 17 now. 6. iMessage Content Key Verification. This is another one of those features that has been teased. In this case, it was teased back in December of 2022. And it allows users such as journalists, government officials, and more to further verify that when someone messages them, those people are who they say they are, rather than a hacker or someone with some malicious intent. Very likely for this to be part of the iOS 17 announcement. 7. Apple has announced the next-gen version of CarPlay last year, but we didn't actually get to see it, as cars with support for it were only set to launch in 2023, meaning that iOS 17 could be when we'll finally see this. And lastly, unsupported devices. Apple is likely going to drop support for some older devices with iOS 17 like they typically do. iOS 16 dropped support for the iPhone 6s, SE1, iPhone 7, while iOS 17 is set to drop support for the iPhone 8, the iPhone 10, 1st-gen iPad Pros, and the 5th-gen iPad. Yeah, surprisingly, this also includes the not-so-old iPhone 10. The reason? A vulnerability found in chips from the A5 to the A11, which allowed for jailbreaking. Apple, of course, aims to secure their latest OS, and since this vulnerability ended with the iPhone XS and the A12 chip, the XS may enjoy a longer lifespan than the iPhone X did. So these were the 8 things that are almost certainly coming. So now let's talk about the things that we may see. These would be the specific user-requested features that Apple is said to be introducing in iOS 17. Whatever these features are, they would have to be quite small and ones that can be easily and quickly implemented. The most likely candidate here is a button that closes all the apps in the multitasking panel rather than you having to individually swipe them away. Apple's approach is that you never need to close any of them, as they don't really affect the performance of your device. But for users who do actively use the multitasking panel to switch between their apps constantly, being able to close all of them in an instant so that you can rebuild, your list of open apps might be quite useful. The second thing that we may see is the ability to replace the lock screen buttons, which are currently hard-coded to the flashlight and the camera, to any apps that we want. I guess the flashlight does make sense to be there, but in terms of the camera, you can already launch it by swiping left from the lock screen, so it doesn't really make sense to also have that dedicated button there that does the same thing, but, in a slower way. And the third thing that we may see is the ability to quickly launch the camera. There are so many times when I miss my shot just because iOS doesn't have the double tap the power button to launch the camera feature. And they could easily do this by having Apple Pay show up automatically, or even just assigning the camera action to, let's say, double tapping the volume up button instead. The iPhone 15 Pro is rumored to come with a customizable mute switch for different actions, so if we don't get this feature on any other iPhones, at least we'll have the OS support for this on the iPhone 15 Pro. We could also see the long requested multiple simultaneous timers in the clock app. as well as some much needed improvements to the dynamic island. For example, it can show you a timer, but for some reason, it still cannot show you the stopwatch. It would be cool to also get the option to pin whatever app we want there. For example, one could pin the weather info or time zone specific info. Or Apple could simply adjust the way notifications work so that when it's about to rain, for example, that pops up in the dynamic island. I mean, especially with the iPhone 15 also getting a dynamic island now, I do believe that we will be seeing some improvements in terms of it. And the last thing that we may see is a better use of haptics in the OS. As currently, despite Apple having some great hardware for haptics, they're not as widely used in the OS as on Google and Samsung phones. We will likely get this with the iPhone 15 Pro that's rumored to add 2 extra haptic motors. However, I wouldn't be surprised if the entire OS improves on the use of haptics rather than this being just an iPhone 15 Pro specific feature. So now let's talk about the things that we want to see. For me at least, aside from everything that I've already talked about, I only have 3 specific requests. First, the ability to run 2 apps side by side at the same time. Even though it wouldn't be something that I'd be using on a daily, I'd still love to have this on the rare occasion when I do actually need to use it. For example, when I'm reading an email and I need to put some dates into my calendar from that email. I'd also love the ability to reorganize the app library, which right now is automatically organized by Apple themselves in pre-selected folders. Like, I love the ability to create my own folders, just like I can on a Samsung phone. And I would also love the ability to use ChatGPT with Siri, of course, as the difference between the two is simply night and day. Like, I know that you can use it with Siri shortcuts, but I'm talking about Apple officially implementing the ChatGPT API into Siri. So those were my suggestions, but you guys had some interesting ones too. For example, David Allen asks for a way to clear the red bubbles on the homepage without removing them entirely. And yeah, that makes sense, and I can fully relate to that. Then Robin asks for a number row on the keyboard, as well as the ability to pause while recording video. I'd love to see these too. Then Patrick asks for a universal back button gesture, just like on Android. Harry from my team agrees, he wants the same thing, and I also fully agree. Some iOS apps do support this, slide from the side to go back, but it's not really something that's implemented on an OS level, and a lot of apps just don't have this. Captain Scout asks for a built-in icon customization feature without the need to use Apple's shortcuts. And plenty of you have mentioned a lot, and I mean a lot, of interesting ideas too that I would love to see Apple implement. But the ones that I've seen you comment the most were ChatGPT and pausing when recording video. Yeah, only 2 months left until we find out what features they will actually bring into iOS 17, so feel free to check out the WWDC 2023 video and do subscribe for our upcoming video on the iPhone 15 Pro. I'm Daniel, it's been ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.